Hi, this is Amy Shaw. I'm representing the Urban Shaman today, and I have Lori Shayew with me, and she's going to tell you a little bit about who she is and what she does, and then we're going to break on into just talking a little bit more about her work and her perspective, experiences, and really excited to have Lori with us today. So, Lori, here you got the mic.
I love it. Thank you, Amy. It's such an honor to be here and speaking to your audience about, the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years. So I'm the founder of the Gifts of Autism. I'm flipping the script the way that people see autism. So I guess I'll just share my, where I had that flip, that shift of perception. So yeah, and so I've been working in this field since 1990, so it's about 30 years now. And when I first came in, I saw it the way that most people do, like, that there's, a disorder, something to be fixed, just buying into the belief that everyone shared. And then in 1995, I was a preschool teacher, actually in a reverse mainstream class. So it was a special needs class and brought in typical developing kids as well. So it was an interesting combination. And there was this kid, Michael. He was 6 at the time. And every morning he would make a Jenga block cabin out of Jenga blocks, and like clockwork, every day. And it looked so easy the way he was doing it. And I thought one morning, I'm going to sit next to him and I'm going to do it because, hey, how hard could it be, right? Yeah. So I started building the cabin and I got to the roof. And as I got to the roof, it was like the roof just kept collapsing over and over and over again. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, why? Why? He makes it look so easy. What's going on here? I looked at him and he just like cocked his head just like a certain amount of degrees when he was he was making his roof. And it was like a moment. Like that, like the literal degrees that it took for him to put the block on to make the roof. And I was like, it just changed my whole. And yeah, then right after I just started like opening my mind to like, oh my God, there's gifts in autism. And like, then I started asking them, show me your gifts, show me your gifts. And that just changed my whole perspective around autism. And it's been expanding ever since. So that's the turnaround story. And I have been working, in all the modalities, pretty much the traditional modalities around autism, that are popular in society today. But I always felt like there was a missing piece. And I got to a place where I saw the kids are actually perfect. It's just that they're highly sensitive children and adults, and they have a completely different reality than most of us. But it's not that they're a deficit. It's just that it's trickier because of their sensitivities and their highly attuned beingness, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. So 30 years, you've been doing this for 30 years. I'm sure that you've had a lot of experiences,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of insight.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in this 30 years that's really stuck out to you, like another moment perhaps that just deepened your understanding?
Well, I mean, tons of insights for sure. That's the perfect word, is insights. It's like, um, you know, yeah, I mean, this is what's coming up for me. I'm just going to allow my intuition to flow since this is all about a shaman show, and I really appreciate your platform. Is that these children are just so misunderstood right now, and they are really helping us raise our vibration and helping humanity raise its consciousness right now. And what would I say that I know about them for sure? I feel like, well, I know that we have them completely pegged wrong, and it's like it's the way that we perceive them that they're going to reflect back to us. Absolute mirror.
Mm-hmm.
We see them, so we have to clean that lens of how we perceive life and how we perceive the children. Because I know that people who, well, I'll speak for myself. When I didn't see them, they were, they were reflecting a lot of aloofness. It was my own aloofness sometimes. Like, I'll give a quick story. It was like I was working in ABA, which I have to say is not me, because I see them completely whole. And ABA is more of it's a therapy that's basically saying that, that we're here to help them fit into our mold, which I found out doesn't work, because they're not here to fit into our mold. So
Right.
that's really important to know. And yeah, so like this one story was, I was at this kid's Matthew's house doing ABA, although I was not. I take pride in this, but I was like the worst ABA therapist. Right? It's a compliment to myself, because I was like not buying into that therapy myself. But there was a day where Matthew just seemed really aloof, and he was in the backyard and he was to himself. And then I went in, I just said to his mom, I said, "Oh, did he have a hard day? What was Matthew's day like?" And she goes, "No, I think he had a good day." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting." So then I went back and I started thinking, and I'm like, "Oh my God, that he's reflecting me." It's like, I didn't want to be there in his own way. Like, I don't want to be here.
Mm,
So that's an example of like the reflections that they show us.
yes.
Pretty cool. I wonder if you have any of those.
um,
I'd love to hear that, since
y-
we're having conversation, right?
yes. I've had any insightful moments working with people with autism. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's your son or if it's, yeah, I mean, like, these sort of like, once you get to a place of like, wow, magical, it's like not what it seems.
Right. Okay,
We open our
right.
mind.
So I haven't, as I represent the Urban Shaman, I represent it, not so much as Amy Shaw. It's a collective.
Okay.
I'm trying to build it into that anyway. So I haven't really talked a lot about myself or my path personally, but
Hmm.
I'd love the opportunity. That yes, I do have a 24-year-old son with autism.
Awesome.
He wasn't diagnosed until he was 15, and that was mostly just because I didn't see a need. There was no need for me to like press in on that. I always, as a mother, right, just kind of accepted that he was
Hmm.
different. And I knew. I mean, even attended church in those days when he was born, and I would take him to the nursery, and the ladies there just loved on him. They would just tell me, there's something special about him. We don't, and he was really little, like 3-4 months old.
Mm. Wow.
Um, Something special. There's just something special, and I always knew that too, and felt that as well. Yeah, and so just there's a story I like to tell a lot. When he was maybe about 5 years old, he didn't start talking at all, like uttering any kind of real coherent sounds until he was 3, and then he had echolalia, so he would repeat the
Hmm.
sound. It wasn't a word, he would repeat the sound twice. So communication was so frustrating, and he would really have meltdowns because nobody could really quite understand his language.
Hmm.
And so he couldn't really get his needs met, in the way he wanted to. And it was a frustrating time, but he started speech therapy, and he made pretty decent progress. And so by the time he was 5, he was, really able to like speak in sentences and communicate himself. And I remember one time I was just, working full time. I was exhausted, like a lot of moms. I came home and I was frustrated, and, I was yelling at him about something. I don't even know what it was, but he held up his hand and he made that like Spock sound, sign where you can separate your finger. The two,
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
can't even make that
Hmm.
with my hand. But he did that, and he just held his hand up to me and he said, "I come in peace."
Oh my gosh. Wow. High
Yeah.
five.
Yeah, and I mean, it was so like jarring. It just totally brought me out of my frustration, and I just started laughing, and I just felt like
Wow.
overwhelmed with love for him because
I feel that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I always knew that like there was something about him that was different in that way, and it was always in a very like endearing way for me.
I know, and such wisdom too. And I feel like, they're so purposeful. I mean, in so many ways, they're so purposeful. I mean, I'm
Oh
always in
yeah.
awe of like the messages that I've gotten.
Yeah, and in the moment. I mean, really present in the now moment, you know. I mean, I even now at 24, I can ask him like, "Oh, this happened yesterday. How are you feeling about that?" And he goes, "That was yesterday."
Oh yeah, living in the now, right?
Yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah, totally.
That's another gift that they have, that they live in the present moment, right?
Yeah,
Where most of us are living in the past or future.
yeah.
Such a great example. Love it. I'm glad you're sharing your part too, just because I feel like there are so many stories, and it's just confirmation that, it's not just one of us seeing it, there's many of us seeing this, this other reality of these children, and it's going to change the way that they behave, the way that they are received, and the way that they share in our world, you know, as we respect them and see them more.
Yeah, it's it's really difficult. I've always tried to sort of keep him in some sort of community of like-minded
Hmm.
people, and he's my son's always kind of stood out as a leader in those communities, and I think that that fundamentally has a lot to do with just my relationship with him, and
Hmm.
that I haven't raised him to feel like, oh, you have autism and then something's wrong with you. I've always
Hmm.
sort of like been like I knew early on too. You tell the story of the blocks. That was my kid. He qualified for Head Start because of the speech delay.
Hmm.
I put him through the Head Start program. It was the only way that we could get early speech services. And I remember I would go to pick him up, and all the other kids are at that age where they're starting to parallel play. My son never parallel play. He would be off in the corner, like he would round, and they were big blocks, they weren't little ones, but he would round
Mm.
them all up, put them in the little wagon, bring them all over to the corner, and build these elaborate structures.
Yep.
He
It's
would be sitting
incredible.
there for like an hour, you know, when most 3-year-olds don't have even that kind of attention span. And I remember his teacher would call me over and she would say, look, can you see? Like, look at this is amazing. So
Yeah, well, that's a great teacher, by the way, as
yeah,
well.
yes, exactly. She was amazing. Always encouraging.
Hmm.
And so I always tried to really encourage him that I knew that he had some amazing skills and gifts. And it's hard though, because our culture is not like that. So he's always his whole life got the other message,
Hmm.
from people telling him, he's not good enough, or something's wrong with him, or he's going to fail at that, or he doesn't qualify for this, or, can't make
Right.
that, or.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally hear you. I know exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, I mean, it's so unseen too. Like, people don't even realize their own energy. People don't even realize their judgments, and they don't even realize how they're affecting the children. So that's a really big piece that I feel is important to talk about as well.
Yeah, I wanted to really lean into that with you a lot more, because my son, he is verbal, and if you look at him and you meet him and you're not really attuned to autism, you won't know it. It'll take you 15 or 20 minutes to figure out.
I love it. Right.
um, I mean, a lot of people just take him as being rude and offensive.
Right. Right. Uh-huh.
Um, um, but also, like, as I shared with you before, I come from a background of social work where I work with developmentally disabled people through the California Regional Center system. So I've seen the whole spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
from very,
Mm-hmm.
very profoundly nonverbal self-injuring,
Mm-hmm.
um, that we're labeling autism, to totally independent, can drive, going to college, so I've seen the whole range, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've, in 30 years, you've worked with the whole range of the spectrum as well. And so for people that are wondering about, or even struggling with family members, or people in their community that are in the more profoundly affected place in the spectrum, what insights do you have about that, and in terms of, like, maybe their behaviors that sometimes are self-injurious, or
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples that I've had personally, because it's always like, I feel like examples are huge when it comes, especially when you're making the shift and you know that there's something that you're not seeing. So I totally get what you mean about the self-injurious. There's so many things happening in that are seen and unseen. So we know, I think this, like, the full moon does affect our children that are sensitive. I would say that all the children are very sensitive. I'm also sensitive, and I'd even say that I'm wired differently as well. And I feel like that piece is important because that piece is what gets me to understand these children. Like it's because I'm wired differently that I understand these children. And I'm
Mm.
not saying I'm diagnosed, but I offer that because I feel like we think that we're all the same, but we're not. We have a lot of different variables. And I've been just sitting with my own different wiring and just exploring my own traits, so to speak. And yeah, it's a spectrum, and I feel like once you start actually exploring, starting to see like your gifts and also your deficits, it's really quite interesting. So I don't know, that wanted to come through me, so I'm letting it come. But the children today just more sensitive than they've ever been before.
Mhm.
And that includes the very, we call the low functioning or severely autistic children. And I kind of heard what you were saying. It's like everybody's being diagnosed. But what I've learned from my experience is that my perception is everything. My perspective is that if the child is just autistic, that they have amazing gifts. We as the rest of society need to clear our lens, because they do like back to us. And yes, I've seen the kids who have seizures. I've seen kids that have the lashing out. There's so many different things happening that we obviously know scientifically that happen and that affect the ocean. It does affect people. It affects me. And then there's also people's attitudes and people's moods and people's the judgments, that are very, very low vibration and
Mhm.
totally have an effect on people. I noticed that when I came from a place of fear, when I was around some adults with autism or autistic or something, some disability, that if they were feeling my fear, then it wasn't it wasn't always be a pretty picture. So what I would do, I'm a little bit nervous right now, and I may not even say it out loud in your mind, right? Telepathy or in your mind, and be like, hey, you know what? I don't know why I'm a little nervous, right, but I'm nervous. But hey, like, I know that it's just me. So I'm neutralizing that energy is what I'm doing. I mean, I love that. This is my work. So don't, anytime I have an opportunity to talk about the children, it's like, it's my joy, honestly. It's
Yeah.
like, I feel like we're being listened to right now, right? Now we're being heard. We're clear. That's this life, right? These kids are incredible,
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm just going to ask the kids to support this call right now,
Yes.
and may it be clear and may I be a vessel for this information.
Yes. Yes.
And may you be also, since we share this,
Ye-
this journey as well.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. hmm Yeah, I just called in the light and my guides and your guides, and I feel like we're okay now. So let's see where it goes. Okay. Yeah, I'll just say that, because of the children, because they're so sensitive, at the very highest place, like, okay, the severely autistic, the ones that have the behaviors, it's like the, they're the most judged, right? Some of
Yes.
them do look a little bit different, obviously sometimes their eyes do look different, and it is a little bit, frightening for some people. I've seen it myself.
Yes.
And I think we should talk about drugs, because drugs also have an impact on these children that are very sensitive. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think I mean, I don't say one way or another, like you should do something or not, but I think we need to really pay attention, especially when the kids do have, they're extremely strong, these kids for the most part. Um, yeah, that we have to really be aware of what we're giving our children, whether it's food or drugs, it's like, and I get it, it's hard, and I get you get it too. It's like you're doing the best you can. We're all doing the best we can. This is an earthly, school that we're on right now. Um, there's just so many factors. I mean, I've had, like I said, okay, I'll go back to that one story with that that I would say he was nonverbal. He was, I want to say he was probably in his 20s. He was in a nonverbal school, a private, not a private, like a non-public school.
Mm,
And I was, yeah, I'll say I was scared because he was drooling, his eyes were definitely not,
right.
typical. There was kind of withdrawn a little bit,
Yeah.
so I wasn't quite sure like what was possible. And I am petite, so that does come into play as well. So, you know, and what was great, so I was fear at the beginning, and then I started kind of having conversations in my head like, oh, this was interesting. So actually, I don't know if you know RPM. Do you know RPM at all?
No.
It's called rapid prompting movement method, rapid prompting method. It's created by Soma Mukhopadhyay,
Okay.
and she's a mom of Tito, who is also nonverbal. And she wanted to communicate with him, and somehow she figured out that through like a letterboard is and like really prompting them fast, that these kids actually have really fast memory, like really fast brains. And
Right.
so like actually this kind of method works for them. But again, my belief at the beginning, and this woman came into this school, and I think it was like one of the first like schools she actually taught at, like she taught this method. And so they were like, there was a day where I was, volunteer not vol- I was teaching, I was a sub. And I was like, no way, this can't work. This is still a long time back. And I just thought, no, I just can't see how this works. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. I'm like, they're just making this stuff up. That was my perspective back then. But it's interesting because today I have a totally different perspective. But going back to the story was, I was helping this kid who was like a young adult, nonverbal, drooling. So I have all of these, just judgments about him. And I was like, he's not getting this, like he's not capable, blah, 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 my whole story.
Yeah.
And it didn't help me. And then I came back the next day and I was just like, why am I here? Like in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And I was actually talking to one of my guides, to be honest with you, because I could say that here. And I was like, why am I here? Like, what is this about? What am I here to learn? And then the young man, he just turned and looked deeply in my eyes. And it
Mm,
was like a soul connection. It was like finally I was literally asking the better question, not instead of like, why me? Why me? Oh my God, what, he can't do it. It was like I opened my mind and it was like, it's like, why am I here? Oh, okay. Then he looks right in my eyes and like, I just dropped into my heart. This just, all of a sudden, I would just call it compassion.
yeah.
And it changed the whole trajectory of how I saw him and how we connected after that. It's not like it changed at all. It was my perspective, it was my attitude that changed. And the next day I didn't have to go back, which was interesting. It was like I got what I needed for that particular case. I was like,
Mhm.
what? Yeah. And one other just quick story. I mean, we can probably talk for hours. I know I do have a ton of stories, but in this very same school, there was another kid who I knew right away, like, wow, this kid can see me. He's all connected to all things. He's also nonverbal, but, you know, adorable kid, just a really sweet kid, very easy to connect with. So there's that piece too that we have to look at. Like the adult, sometimes, we have these perceptions like, oh my God, I was creating that, for the old, the young man. And now there's a younger kid who's like maybe 9, 10 years old, and he comes up to me, puts his hands on my shoulder, and he pulls his head back, and he's looking like deeply in my eyes. And then all of a sudden, his head sort of comes towards me. Not like I wasn't afraid at all. I was more intrigued. So again, that's a big piece. And I knew he was looking inside my soul, and
Mhm.
he's just started laughing. And the next second, all of the staff is just running towards him. Stop, don't do it, it's inappropriate, so it just shows you the contrast of like where people are at. It's like I couldn't be really enjoying this. I did enjoy the moment, but then that moment was very quick, to move to the next place, which was the fear, like this is not appropriate, pulling him back, and that is the journey that we're all on right now.
Yes. I and I relate to that so much because just being a mom with a child that was different.
Mm-hmm.
I over and over, I encountered in his life that the experience of the fear and how people would respond to him, even if,
Mm-hmm.
even as a seemingly quote unquote normal looking, verbal person, he's, still has, those features that he's can be in people's spaces and make them very uncomfortable. But it's interesting because, I watched the dynamic, and he walks away from those situations still confused, like even now, right? Still confused about like what is, like, to him it's something's wrong with us, that we live in this culture of constantly being afraid and
Mm-hmm.
pulling away from each other and
Mm.
and where I see him like really lean in and in this amazing authenticity and just a realness that it makes people uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's right. He's absolutely right. It's like we have so many, wounds, and we are living in the past. I said that a little earlier. It's like, and we don't realize it. We're the ones that are actually asleep, where these kids, there are millions of them that are actually enlightened beings. And that's why they know truth is the only thing that's real. We're one, and we're the ones that are confused. So he's absolutely right. That has been my experience as well. And it's my journey too to heal those parts of me
Yeah.
that, are seeing distortedly.
Yep. Yep.
And that's the work that we're all here to do, whether we're conscious of it or not. And the people that are not conscious are having a harder time because it's like they're like in the victim consciousness, like it's someone else's fault.
Right.
you know
Yes.
and I feel like that's where we are with autism too, like in the schools. And still it's like, oh, they had a bad day. It's like, no, you had a hard day because he's pushing every button in you that is wounded. If you're triggered, it's because there's something that's unresolved, is basically it.
Yes. Yes.
hmm
Yep.
versus like blaming, like, oh my god, he's had a really hard day. And that's where energy is going into, like, oh, I hope that my kids have a good day today. And we all do that. It's just like it's an inside job.
Yep. Yes. Yeah, and even talking about the victim, for me that's always been sort of my resistance to the movement that wants to label vaccines and autism as a vaccine injury.
hmm
Not to say that there isn't a cause and effect, because I believe that's possible. But I think when we, for me, I've seen when people really like weigh in on that and hold on to that,
hmm
it's a continuing perspective of that this is an injury and that we don't want it and something's wrong.
hmm
And in reality, I see like my own son, who's just highly sensitive, and
hmm
the older he got, the more sensitive he got. And
hmm
so his sensitivity to me was more like his teaching of how much toxicity is in our environment. So
yes,
I didn't take it as like an injury to him, more like he came to this earth to suffer that, to sort of like educate at least my
exactly.
family, at least my family about these things.
Well, your family and everyone that is in contact with him.
Yes. Yes.
I call it autism awareness. Like when I used to work in the communities with the kid, with the parent and the child, I would always tell them, okay, like when we go to Target or if we go to McDonald's, we're going to call it autism awareness. So like if your child, so basically what happens is that you're neutralizing your energy as like for me and say that parent, it's like, okay, so basically if your child has like a meltdown or whatever tantrum, it's like this is a great opportunity for the community to learn from him, whether fear comes up or whatever, like inappropriate like gestures or whatever, like a lot will not be said, right? I've seen many kids like swipe the french fries from someone's plate in McDonald's, right? And the reaction that people have had, which is like, that's mine, right?
Yeah.
So the ego is alive and well. And the kids live in oneness. They live in this amazing different reality, which is a real reality. Our reality is definitely distorted, but we don't know it because we
Right.
think our reality is real, and we think everyone lives in our reality, which is kind of funny. And I believed in that reality too, and still, I go in and out of it too. But yeah, it's so if you had that sort of perspective of like autism awareness, what I call, and all of a sudden, like, okay, well, like I'm not in control of what my son does, now you can actually enjoy your time there. Your energy is not affecting your son now. So anything that happens is more of like watching a movie. And I'll tell you, like for me, definitely, I was not feeling the pressure because I would set myself up for that autism awareness. Now, of course, he wasn't injuring self-injuring or hurting anyone else.
Right.
But it does make a difference when you're coming in a very neutral place versus like, oh my God, I hope that he keeps his hands to himself. It's like, instead of just letting it go and just like being okay with what happened, the education side of it.
Right, right. Well, when you kind of own that as a personal issue, then it sort of like binds everything up, and then
Mm-hmm.
it feeds back because, as my son taught me, he's so sensitive. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm like having anxiety and I'm all bound up inside,
Mm.
then he'll start feeding off that, and then it actually does cause more of behaviors that if I'm just relaxed and like co-piloting, and I'm like going,
Mm-hmm.
hey kid, we're going to go to the store and screw all these people if they don't like you. Right. And I just have that
Mm-hmm.
sort of attitude about it. He's
Yeah, it's the same thing.
totally
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what I also notice is like, if you feel anxious, which is like, you don't have to be like perfect all the time. We're not, So I find that if I just say, you know what, I'm really anxious right now too. And it's okay. I'm being authentic. I'm being real, versus like, I'm trying to hide it, which
fine.
is not, they see through all of that cover up.
Yes.
They'd
Yes.
rather you be authentic and say, "Hey, I'm a little anxious right now, but I'm working through it, and I'm going to be okay." You'll notice that they rise up
Right.
because you're being authentic. It's a high vibration authenticity,
Right.
being real. So
Right.
that's a little nugget right there.
Yeah, no, and that's true because they are so sensitive that I've really seen that they can see past the facade. So when
Hmm.
you're putting up a facade and there's this sort of disconnection, it is more problematic. It really is. And I think neurotypical people or people that aren't on the spectrum or maybe aren't as sensitive, we don't pick up on the same sort of cues and subtleties that they do. And so
Hmm.
we can easily like walk around and have these facades with one another, and like it's not a thing, but we don't experience, I guess, maybe the dissonance that
Hmm.
causes in the way that I think people with autism might.
Hmm. Well, something's coming up for me, and I feel it's important too. I feel like the spectrum is a spectrum, right? I mean, it's a huge spectrum. I do feel like, we all share traits, whether you call it autism traits or not. I feel like it's more, as we're evolving as a culture, as a humanity is a better word, is like we are becoming more sensitive. I'm becoming more sensitive. I definitely am in tune with my sensitivity now. And because of that, I notice other people that are highly sensitive too.
Hmm.
Um, and it's, I feel like there is a facade where people are, conditioned to fit into a box. And some people do it better than others. And I feel like in a way we're giving permission to people to be themselves. I think that's what the kids are here to teach us too, is that we're here as unique emanations, but we're also one. It's like the like the key is to be yourself fully, but we're afraid to really stand out. Kind of funny,
Mm-hmm.
but I find like this work that I get to do, it's like I'm kind of shy, there's a big piece of me that's shy, and yet here I am. I'm a voice for the voiceless. It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of an interesting role that I'm playing here. But it's because I have this information that like I have a responsibility to share it. Because how much effort do these kids and adults have to put into communicating? A lot, just
Mm-hmm.
to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
So can I do my part? Yeah, I can do my part.
Mm-hmm.
So that part wanted to come through. I feel like some people will get some kind of insights around that, because I feel like we're all here, we all have our own roles that we're playing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is about the children, but I feel like we're all on the spectrum somewhere. And I've been exploring my own colors, you can say, my own traits.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're going as a culture. I think that's where we're going as a humanity. We're opening up our faculties, our intuition, and we're in a time of great change right now. People are being rattled, and we had huge earthquake here in LA, in Southern California last week. It's like we're having these opportunities of being shaken awake.
Yeah.
So let's wake up. Let's wake
Yeah.
up,
Yeah. Yeah.
humanity, right?
Yeah. And that's interesting. That really kind of segues into shamanism. Shamanism has we all have ancestral roots to it, but for a lot of European immigrants that came to the United States, African
Mhm.
American people that were brought over as slaves, this new culture that we're building, a lot of us are cut off. We don't really know exactly. We don't have that clear lineage of the verbal history that was handed down for generations, and so as a culture, we've suffered it tremendously. But there's that real shamanic renaissance that's happening as this, global shift is taking place in consciousness, and people are feeling that impulse, the shamanic impulse or that archaic impulse to get back to a more, communal, simple
Mm,
way of life. And, I'm wondering, where people on the spectrum might fit in that. Do
hmm.
you have you thought about that at all? Probably not, maybe, because maybe.
Y- Yeah, maybe I'm not even really understanding the question so much.
Well, okay, so I mean, you and I talked privately, for example, about the horse boy,
Mhm.
Rowan.
Right, right.
Okay, and I remember a story that Rupert, his dad, told. Because my son and I have been out there to the ranch, and he told a story about when Rowan was very little, like 2 and 3 years old. He had such difficulty consoling him, and the only time that he would be calm is if they were outside in nature. And
Mhm.
talked about, like, as he just like stopped trying to parent this kid so hard and just let him be the leader, and he started
Mm,
following around this little 2 and 3 year old boy, how amazed he was that he was able to really start interacting with the local plant life, and like he was really
mm,
quickly learning like a sense of um the plant life, like what could be eaten and what couldn't be, and just he
mm,
was blown away by it. And so I think, I know for my own son as well, that he thrives when he's out in nature, and
mhm.
he doesn't do as well when he's in real urban populated, concrete areas. So
Yeah,
I've always wondered if there's some sort of, connection with that as well, and this.
yeah. Now I understand.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I appreciated that, and maybe we just needed to expand on that. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they are. They do thrive in nature. I think we all do thrive in nature. I think we forget because we live in such a stressful, society again. Like, it's like we're working, we're not even really living, we're just existing, from one thing to the next, and we're not even breathing and taking time to really like connect. So Yeah, I would say like first of all, I love that documentary. I saw it in the movie theater actually because I was so excited about that. And it really did resonate for me. Um, Rowan, yeah, I just love you know, the passion that they had to share their story with all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way that he connected with the horse,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But yeah, I didn't know about the plants, but it makes so much sense to me. These kids absolutely thrive in nature. And there's so many things that they do actually ask, for the perfect school. Because today we see so many issues around schooling, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, that we're all being taught the same way, like as if we're all cookie cutter minds, that we have one particular mind and not different learning styles. It's like, and we all have that innate intelligence within us, but we're not really given that opportunity to really express ourselves. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I was not a good student when I was going through schooling. It wasn't my thing, and now I look back and I can see why. It's just like I wasn't wired that way, But it's hard. It was hard for me because my mind and my mind was still like, "What's wrong with me? Like, why do these kids like go through all of these questions so fast and make it look so easy?" And I'm all here like slowly going through these questions, and like I don't even care. It was such a challenge, and now I get it's because I have a different type of mind. And I feel like that is a huge piece to talk about, is that, there we need lots of different minds. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that, like when we talk about Rowan and other kids that are really connected to nature, that yeah, I mean, there's so much that we don't see. That's what it comes up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um and there's so much that we need to, that's within us that wants to express itself, you know. And so schooling is so rigid, and nature obviously it's all abundant, right? It's alive, and yet most people don't even really understand that. It's like, oh, we live on this planet, but they don't really get that it's a live and thriving planet. and and our, the cause and effect again does affect, the planet, and it affects us because we're one with the planet. We are the planet too. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just it's like there's so many layers is what I'm getting. But yeah, they are bringing us back to like what is most important.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, our connection, right? They want us to remember our connection with each other, to each other, and with the planet at large,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah,
know.
and I think, as you were talking, I was thinking about how affected by the moon cycles my own son is, very much so. And he identified that on, quite a few years ago.
Hmm.
And, a lot of people, I think, aren't even cognizant that the moon is there, right? They might see it once a month and go, oh, look at the moon tonight. It's pretty. Um,
Hmm.
and I think for a lot of parents that are actually dealing with children that are on the spectrum, it can become overwhelming, right? Because it's the food, it's the cleaning chemicals, it's the cycles of the earth.
Hmm.
I mean, it's all these things. And but I as you were talking, I was also thinking about how the behavior itself really is the form of communication. And
Hmm.
yeah, and if people can just shift from seeing it as like this problem to be fixed and more as like a communication of something.
Right. Hmm. I've actually said that too before. I told that's what I believe, that behaviors are communication. And
Mhm.
so we have to open our minds as like, okay, what are you trying to communicate? And how deeply do you want to understand your child? Like what will you go through to, connect with your child? And yeah, it might not be the way that like everyone else does it. Like sending your kid off to therapy is not, it's just it could be uh it could go back, it could not serve, and it's not fair to just put the whole responsibility on other people. It's like, and like it's just for your child to be fixed. It's like, what about your part in like you cleaning your lens so that you can actually enjoy your child? I mean, I think every parent wants to really enjoy their child, and there is a like an intrinsic deep connection no matter what, because we are souls and we have bodies. It's not the other way around. And so if we see as ourselves being souls first, then we know that, well, the soul is perfect. Like the soul is whole and complete.
Yes.
But the human part is wounded. It's like we have a lot of conditions, a lot of experiences that may not have been, a learning opportunity for us. And
Right.
then lot more that we don't see, right?
Yes.
And then, teachers, so many people that affect our conditioning, our beliefs, all of that, programs.
Mm-hmm.
So, and yet these kids are so much more clear on living in the moment. They are unconditional. Like I've done, I've been around so many kids that are absolutely unconditional, and they wouldn't expect me to change a thing about myself. I mean, I've never been around other people that I could say the same thing for. It's like, oh, but if you would do this, it's like, oh, but my friend over there on the spectrum, he loves me the way I am. I mean, you can feel it, right? Like
Yeah.
without judgment. It's palpable, and I feel like that's what they're trying to show us. It's like we're here to just love each other, beyond any kind of, you know, issues or whatever you want to call it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've seen, because my son, I've seen, sometimes he says things by cultural standards that are really inappropriate. He'll comment on how someone's dressed, and it's not always nice. It's not always a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
You
Right, right. Yeah.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
but it's he's just speaking a fact. And so, like, as you're talking about unconditional love, I'm also thinking that people take that personal, right? They take it
Mm-hmm.
like it's an insult to them, when actuality, because I know his heart,
Mm-hmm.
he's very unconditional. He's just speaking
Mm-hmm.
a fact. Like,
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
not
that's
speaking
funny.
to your person or your soul. He's just saying, oh, look at that dress you got on. It's you know
It's
but
funny, right?
yeah.
Right, but the ego, doesn't appreciate it very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been also the recipient of a couple of those. It's like, yeah, it definitely, and you look at it like, wow, why am I triggered? And it's like, why did you say that? That's not nice. But it's true. Like, one of it brings us one. He's now an adult, but definitely he was Aspie, right? And Aspies are very interesting too. They do say what's on their mind. And they do have a different sort of energy about them, is a good way to put it. Different type of attitude as well. But they'll say like, you guys are indoctrinated, like we're conditioned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, we are conditioned. And the thing is, it's like, oh, you're so indoctrinated you don't even know it. It's like the Matrix, the movie.
Yeah.
It's like we don't even know how much that the program is running us,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
And so we get hurt when we're not, being recognized or or honor, whatever. It's all the egos talk, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, and also I just wanted to, I feel like it needs to be clear. It's like they're not, they also came to earth to learn too. It's not like they're all these masters and like they have nothing to learn. I feel like sometimes it also goes to this place where people say, well, they're masters, but yeah, we're here. The rest of us are here to also hold, a lot of grounding space for them as well. And yeah, there's a lot of social stories, a lot of social opportunities that we can support them, and that they need it. They need our help. So
Absolutely.
it is a give and take. It's never like, okay, yeah, you might be able to see things that we're not seeing. And we're also here to help you ground. So what I see is like a lot of these kids are helping us ascend, right? Because they're like triggering us. And it's like,
Yeah.
why am I acting like, and we're also helping them descend physically, like on
Yes.
this earth. So
Absolutely. Yes.
it's an important, it's two ways.
Yes. Thank you for offering that. That is very, very true.
Yeah. Well, I've had, my own experiences as well. Like, it's been an expansive journey so far, right? I mean, I'm still on it, and I'm open, to where it leads me next.
Hmm.
And I mean, I've said this to many people. Not many people can really appreciate it yet, but like I believe that autism really isn't about autism at the end of the day,
Right.
right? You get it.
Yeah. I completely get it. And and to just kind of interject the shamanism piece again is, um, I would never suggest that, like, everybody who has autism is shamanic. But obviously,
Hmm.
as there's people on the spectrum as well as off the spectrum who have this shamanic impulse, and I appreciate you so much saying that piece about helping them ground and bring it in, because to me, I really see that as the path for some people on the spectrum legitimately, whereas as a culture, they're constantly told, well, you can't be this, you can't do that, you can't, you
Hmm.
can't, you can't, when in reality, I mean, we see autism, expressed through mysticism. We see it expressed through, all sorts of different energy healing, and all sorts of different potential modalities of service to, beyond just the things that like we're picking up, right? But an actual
Hmm.
like really identified path of service.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
certainly shamanism can fit in there. And so I guess what I want to suggest is that being autistic doesn't automatically mean you're a shaman, but it also doesn't mean that you aren't.
Yeah, yeah, which I think is an important piece, and I've said this too before. Some of them I do call, like you call them shamans, I call them mystics. So
Right.
there are like I've heard, that there are like millions of these autistic mystics, which are like what you would call shamans, but they're not all. It's like the rest of us. We all have a certain level of consciousness, right? And it goes for them as well. It's like we can't say that they're all, at this elevated space.
Right.
And yet, how would you know, and I feel like if we treated each other like we are in the elevated space, that we actually will shine through. Like if someone treated me as a mystic, I have a feeling that that I would rise to that occasion as well.
Right.
Versus like something is wrong with me, and like you keep mirroring to me like there's something that's wrong with me, and so now I'm not going to get out of that loop. Versus like,
Right.
hey, you know what, you're pretty awesome. And I am gonna put some more energy looking, or awareness at looking at what you're passionate about. Like you said, your son with the blocks, what he was able to create. I saw that in my nephew as well, who is diagnosed with ADHD. At like 2 3 years old, he was making these Legos, like following the directions, and I was like, an adult. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, how do you do this? Like,
Right. Right.
I feel like the low functioning one here.
Yeah.
So again, it's like we all have gifts, and I feel like it's really important that we always support each other with the gifts that we have. Just like it feels like the shaman piece too. It's like the shaman,
Yeah.
has a lot of gifts, and they can see a lot that are not you know seen by most people.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it really is like a grounding kind of legitimate path of expression of the gifts for some people.
Hmm.
And as you were talking, I was thinking, I'm sure you're familiar with Carly Fleischman's story.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and I was moved to tears profoundly when I read about her dad and his testimony of how, because she was nonverbal, they just automatically assumed there was not intelligence there in a sense.
Hmm.
And so he said he was horrified the moment that like she was able to start communicating and responding intelligently.
Hmm. Yes.
All these years they had talked horribly about her in front of her,
Hmm.
and she was there completely witnessing and understanding everything that was being said about her. you know
Yep.
I mean, gosh, that just like, it's gut wrenching.
Well, I've also have people in my life that are like that too, and I can tell you, as someone who worked with someone, exactly, not exactly like her, but not verbal, and like, yeah, you definitely, it's you don't have that belief or understanding that they absolutely understand everything, and I feel like that is a big message that I want to say right now to your audience, is that that like if they are autistic and there's no other like diagnosis involved, is like they are totally present to everything we're saying, no matter what their output is, like whatever they look like, they're if they're
Behavior.
flapping
Yes.
or whatever their
Yes.
behavior may be. It's like you have to transcend that behavior, because yeah, I have a friend, Nicole, who I was shadowing back like so many years ago, and she was 6 years old at the time, and definitely I didn't, I saw in her eyes that she was very present, but still my belief was like, well, but she's still not, fully present, whatever that meant for me. But then it was years later, which I was friends with the whole family, and her mom calls me and says, oh my God, Lori, you're not going to believe this. Nicole started typing, and what she's typing is like spiritual, knowledge, and like, this really deep spiritual information. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, can I come over? Like, I want to see this. I was so, and what came up for me after I met, there was like 5 of us in the room, and she typed, she's like, oh my God. She's like, finally, everybody gets me. Wow.
Wow. Yeah, so there's that piece of that too. You talk about the soul, and I really think of that in terms of like suffering, that they've chosen to come in here and incarnate, in this culture that's so resistant to them and hostile to them, and it's like a chosen suffering, right? I mean, it's wow.
I think I would say at some level, yes, but I also feel like for I feel like there's people like me and you are here, right? And so if we are the bridge that can actually bring this knowledge out to the public, that's why, we have to speak. Because yes, they did come in, maybe, you know, I don't think that I do think they sacrificed for sure. And
Yeah.
they knew what they chose. Like they chose to come in, came in, autistic, like, or, came in with this, they chose, like, I get it. And it meant that. But at the same time, I feel like, they do want their parents to wake up. They do want, to still live in harmony, because they do go to other realms where it's much more peaceful. Earth is very low vibrational, very dense. And so there's a lot of times where they check out, and a lot of people will say, oh, they're in their own world. Well, why are they in their own world? Like, where can you take responsibility for them being in their own world if it's so dense here? And you had that understanding that this world is so dense. You can't control everything. I get that. And then there's unseen things like the planets and moon. And there's just like, even me, like the last few days, I've been feeling very, very sensitive
Yeah.
and a little rocky too. It's been a roller coaster for me as a empath, as a highly insensitive
Yeah.
person,
Yeah. Yep.
you know, and it's not nearly what they experience too. So I have that perspective. I can't even imagine, like hearing everything, smelling everything, like overload of
Oh,
senses.
yeah.
And that's what they experience. A lot of them experience that.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
hmm And I feel like a lot of us do too. And I feel like that's an opportunity for a conversation, because that's what I'm saying about the traits. It's easy to be like, oh, they're autistic and we're not.
Right.
But I do feel like we are on the spectrum. I do believe that we are all on the spectrum, and how that, spectrum represents in us,
hmm
is an opportunity for us to go deeper.
So you're saying that you think this idea of neurotypical doesn't really exist, that it's all one, and that there's no division between like neurotypical and autism, right? Is that what you
uh, well, I think energy is energy, frequency, vibration, energy. Like we're all energy, right? And
Mhm,
so, like, how can we be separate from? We are energy. We're all energy, but we're all frequencies. We're all different frequencies, right?
mhm,
And like I said, it's a spectrum. I just may have a certain colors. They may have different colors. The ones that are highly sensitive that do have seizures, is what I've heard, is that they're taking in way too much input. They're taking in too much energy, and it's overloading. And
mhm,
that's why these meltdowns happen as well. It's like too much is coming in, and they don't know. It's like the filter's not there.
mhm.
Where, some of us don't have that frequency. We're not that sensitive. You know and but having compassion is raising my frequency too,
Mhm,
right? As
mhm.
I raise my frequency, then I'm actually meeting that person where they're at, versus judging them. Judging would bring my frequency down.
Right.
Compassion would bring it up. So this is a piece I've never talked about, so I love that it's coming through right now, is how important that we are more aware of the energy that we're bringing in and our choices that we're bringing in. Yeah, I could be afraid and I could have some fears, but I can acknowledge that, yeah, in this moment, I'm a little bit, there's a little fear coming through, but I totally get you, hear me, you're with me. even as that child's going through a meltdown or whatever, it's like, I'm here with you right now. We're going to get through this together is better than like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. Oh my God, like the worst scenario, right? And then you're asking for it in some level
Right.
versus like, because I have actually supported a young man who went through a seizure,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to be very present with him,
Mm-hmm.
where like other people were like frantic,
Right. Yeah, I get
and
it.
that,
I've
yeah,
talked to
and
you a little bit about my son's seizure, and I don't really want to go into that in this,
right. Hmm.
maybe in a different context, but I would love to offer a lot about that,
Hmm.
and what what my son taught me through that, and yeah, what an amazing journey.
Hmm. And I love that sounds like you healed a lot around your perception around that too.
Yes, yes, yes.
That's an important conversation.
And
Yeah.
how that really like even stretched out into my community. I would just love to have the opportunity to like really share some testimony on that, and just yeah.
I would even love to hear your story as well, because I think it's anytime we hear new information, it's only going to help us all,
Yeah. Yep.
because that's a big fear that parents have around, kids on the spectrum, or,
Yes.
the level. And there's so many that do have, not, not everyone, but the ones that do have seizures, it is a big worry, and I understand why. I mean, there's a book that was written by a friend of mine. It's called Autism: A New Perspective.
Hmm.
uh do you want to, maybe you can post it later in the link,
Okay.
if that feels right. But
Yeah.
he does actually talk about his experience and the seizures as well.
Hmm.
So I feel like that would be a good resource, and that's why it's coming forward for me.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Lori, we've been talking for a while now, and I feel like we could just keep talking for
I
hours.
know.
I love talking with you, and it's for me, like being an autism parent, you're like a breath of fresh air. So I really
Mm,
appreciate connecting with you, and feeling, a lot of resonance and understanding between us. And I just appreciate you. I appreciate you so much. I look forward to continuing discussions with you.
yeah, I appreciate you, and yeah, I definitely feel honored to be here today talking about my perspective and my experience, and I really honor all of your, you as a parent and all parents, because it's not an easy journey. And I really feel like it's important to say that. I know your journey is not easy, and yet it's so rewarding in its own right as well.
Mm,
And I bet I can imagine how, refreshing it is to have a different perspective that obviously most people don't have. So I
mhm.
receive that, and I just want to acknowledge you also,
Thank
for having this conversation and having me on your show.
Oh, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? Maybe, is there a website that you have, or a book you're working on, or something that you want to share about your
Yeah.
life?
Well, yeah, we'd love to. So, I know that there's a lot of parents out there that are, figuring out their children. And I do want to, like I said earlier, it's like, I do feel like we're all in the spectrum. I know there's a lot of kids that are being born today that are very sensitive, and it's just really confused. It's like misunderstood, because a lot of times the school have them assessed and tested because they might be autistic, but they're not. And it's because they're so sensitive. Again, that piece of sensitivity is so important, and it's so misunderstood. And so I actually do offer online classes for people that are ready to do a deep dive and to really clear their own lenses around, their children. And like I said, it's not really just about autism, although it is a big part of my niche, but I also see that these children today that are being born are very different than like the generation before them, or even a couple or three, right? Now there's so many generations, but um, that, to really understand your child can change the whole trajectory of your relationship, can change the trajectory of their education, just understanding, their wiring a little bit better. Like I said, I have different wiring, and because of my different wiring, I'm able to understand, these children. And I wouldn't even label just them as autistic. It's like, it's beyond label, that these children are just highly sensitive children that are misunderstood. And yes, we use these different labels that are somewhat frequencies, and each frequency has a different label. That's kind of a really clear way of putting it, if you can understand it. It's
Yeah.
like autism is a certain frequency, or Asperger's is a different frequency, or ADHD is a different frequency, right? Dyslexia is a different it's like they're all different. And then there's the kids that are not even on the diagnosed, that their parents are like, wow, they're just not really fitting into the mold. Like they'll just say, well, that's just my kid. It's like that they just beat the drum to their own rhythm type of thing. So I offer that to everyone. If that resonates, I do have an online class. I call it embracing a new perspective in autism. But I don't want people to get caught up in that word autism, because I feel like I've worked with parents that have kids that are undiagnosed, that are not diagnosed, and they've had a huge turnaround with their children who were having a lot of behaviors. And now that there's absolute harmony in the family, because the parents are understanding their children at a deeper level. So I do offer online classes. And yeah, my website is thegiftsofautism.com. And also they can find me on Facebook. I do a lot of Facebooking too, under my name.
Great, great, great. Good
Maybe
stuff.
we can link underneath, the interview,
Yep.
the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So grateful for you to have this opportunity for me, Amy, and love that you're having this kind of show out there with different types of topics. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you too, Lori. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.